Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I am back with some more philosophical thought. I don't know what to call this one yet, but we're going to be dealing with um, Nietzsche today. We're going to be dealing with his work, Thus Spake Zarathustra, which was one of his signature works everybody talks about as required reading. So we're going to read it. We like to dispense knowledge over here, and this will be one of the ways in which to do that. If you are unfamiliar with me, my unconventional beliefs, or the things that I do, if any of my terminology ever throws you off, there are resources linked in the corner and in the box down below, as well as the original text. Uh, we will be doing the introduction by Mrs. Forster Nietzsche. It is important to note that Mrs. Nietzsche here was much more less tolerant of other peoples than Nietzsche himself was, to the best of my understanding. By that I mean that she held that the Superman was more about the race than Nietzsche did himself. Uh, I am not a scholar. I hold no degrees. I am just somebody interested in history and in knowledge and in philosophy and a variety of subjects. And as part of my vocal therapy, we will be reading aloud from the works of Nietzsche. I will be discussing as we go along instead of trying to reserve my thoughts for the end. So if that format is off putting to you, this is probably not going to be the series for you. Not all of my series are for everyone, but you can probably find something that you will enjoy in the links provided above. With that being said, we are going to dive into the text of the introduction by Mrs. Forster Nietzsche, How Zarathustra Came into Being. Zarathustra is my brother's most personal work. It is the history of his most individual experiences, of his friendships, ideals, raptures, bitterest disappointments, and sorrows. Above it all, however, there soars, transfiguring it, the image of his greatest hopes and remotest aims. My brother had the figure of Zarathustra in his mind from his very earliest youth. He once told me that even as a child he had dreamt of him. At different periods in his life he would call this haunter of his dreams by different names. But in the end, he declares in a note on the subject, I had to do a Persian the honor of identifying him with this creature of my fancy. Persians were the first to take a broad and comprehensive view of history. Every series of evolutions, according to them, was presided over by a prophet, and every prophet had his Hazar, his dynasty of 1,000 years. All Zarathustra's views, as also his personality, were early conceptions of my brother's mind. Whoever reads his posthumously published writings for the years 1869 to 82 with care will constantly meet with passages suggestive of Zarathustra's thoughts and doctrines. For instance, the ideal of the Superman is put forth quite clearly in all of his writings during the years 1873 to 75. And in We Philologists, the following remarkable observations occur. How can one praise and glorify a nation as a whole? Even among the Greeks, it was the individuals that counted. The Greeks are interesting and extremely important because they reared such a vast number of great individuals. How is this possible? The question is one which ought to be studied. I am interested only in the revelations of a people to the rearing of the individual man, and among the Greeks the conditions were unusually favorable for the development of the individual, not by any means owing to the goodness of the people, but because of the struggles of their evil instincts. With the help of favorable measures, great individuals might be reared who would be both different from and higher than those heretofore have owed their existence to mere chance. Here we may still be hopeful in the rearing of exceptional men. The notion of rearing the Superman is only a new form of an ideal Nietzsche already had in his youth, that the object of mankind should lie in its highest individuals. Or, as he writes in Schopenhauer as Educator, mankind ought constantly to be striving to produce great men. This and nothing else is its duty. But the ideals he most revered in those days are no longer held to be the highest types of men. No, around this future ideal of a coming humanity, the Superman, the poet spread the veil of becoming. Who can tell to what glorious heights man can still ascend? This is why, after having tested the worth of our noblest ideal, that the Savior, in the light of the new valuations, the poet cries with passionate emphasis in Zarathustra, "Never yet hath there been a Superman. Naked have I seen both of them, the greatest and the smallest man. All too similar are they still to each other. Verily, even the greatest found I, all too human." The phrase, the rearing of the Superman, has very often been misunderstood. By the word rearing, in this case, is meant the act of modifying, by means of new and higher values, values which, as laws and guides of conduct and opinion, are now to rule over mankind. In general, the doctrine of the Superman can only be understood correctly in conjunction with the other ideas of the authors, such as the order of rank, the will to power, and the transvaluation of all values. He assumes that Christianity, as a product of the resentment of the botched and the weak, has put in ban all that is beautiful, strong, proud, and powerful. In fact, all of the qualities resulting from strength, and that, in consequence, all forces which tend to promote or elevate life, have been seriously undermined. Now, however, a new table of valuations must be placed over mankind, namely, that of the strong, mighty, and magnificent man, overflowing with life and elevated to his zenith, the Superman, who is now put before us with overpowering passion as the aim of our life, hope, and will. And just as the old system of valuing, which only extolled the qualities favorable to the weak, the suffering, and the oppressed, has succeeded in producing a weak, suffering, and modern race, so this new and reverse system of valuing ought to rear a healthy, strong, lively, and courageous type, which would be a glory to life itself. Stated briefly, the leading principle of this new system of valuing would be, all that proceeds from power is good, and all that springs from weakness is bad. This type must not be regarded as a fanciful figure. It is not a nebulous hope which is to be realized at some indefinitely remote period, thousands of years hence, nor is it a new species, in the Darwinian sense, of which we can know nothing, and which it would therefore be somewhat absurd to strive after. But it is meant to be a possibility which men of the present could realize with all of their spiritual and physical energies, provided they adopted the new values. I'm going to interject here that so far what I am reading does not lead into the assessment that I had read that she was more racist than him. Like, this is not talking about race. This is talking about being a better person and therefore creating a better race. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The author of Zarathustra never lost sight of that egregious example of transvaluation of all values through Christianity, whereby the whole of the deified mode of life and thought of the Greeks, as well as Romandom, was almost annihilated or transvalued in a comparatively short time. Could not a rejuvenated Greco-Roman system of valuing, once it had been refined and made more profound by the schooling which 2,000 years of Christianity had provided, effect another such revolution within a calculable period of time, until that glorious type of manhood shall finally appear, which is to be our new faith and hope, and in the creation of which Zarathustra exhorts us to participate. In his private notes on the subject, the author uses the expression Superman, always in the singular, by the by, as signifying the most thoroughly well-constituted type, as opposed to modern man. Above all, however, he designates Zarathustra himself as an example of the Superman. In Ecce Homo, he is careful to enlighten us concerning the precursors and prerequisites to the advent of this highest type. in referring to a certain passage in the Gay Science. In order to understand this type, we must first be quite clear in regards to the leading physiological condition on which it depends. This condition is what I call great healthiness. I know not how to express my meaning more plainly and more personally than I have done in at least one of the last chapters, Aphorism 382, of the 5th book of the Gaia Scienza. We, the new, the nameless, the hard to understand, it says there, we firstlings of a yet untried future, we require for a new end also a new means, namely, a new healthiness, stronger, sharper, tougher, bolder, and merrier than all healthiness hitherto. He whose soul longeth to experience the whole range of hitherto recognized values and desirabilities, and to circumnavigate all the coast of this ideal Mediterranean Sea, who, from the adventures of his most personal experience, wants to know how it feels to be a conqueror and discoverer of this ideal, and as likewise how it is with the artist, the saint, the legislator, the sage, the scholar, the devotee, the prophet, and the godly nonconformist of the old style, requires one thing above all for that purpose, great healthiness. Such healthiness as one not only possesses, but also constantly acquires and must acquire, because one unceasingly sacrifices it again and must sacrifice it. And now, after having been on the long on the way in this fashion, we, Argonauts of the ideal, more courageous, perhaps, than prudent, and often enough shipwrecked and brought to grief, nevertheless dangerously healthy, always healthy again, it would seem as if in recompense for it all that we have a still undiscovered country before us, the boundaries of which no one has yet seen, a beyond to all countries and corners of the ideal known hitherto, a world so over-rich in the beautiful, the strange, the questionable, the frightful, and the divine, that our curiosity as well as our thirst for possession thereof have got out of hand. Alas, that nothing will now any longer satisfy us. How could we still be content with the man of the present day after such outlooks and with such a craving in our conscience and consciousness? Sad enough, but it is unavoidable that we should look on the worthiest aims and hopes of the man of the present day with ill-concealed amusement, and perhaps should no longer look at them. Another ideal runs on before us, a strange, tempting ideal, full of danger, to which we should not like to persuade anyone, because we do not so readily acknowledge anyone's right thereto, the ideal of a spirit who plays naively, that is to say, involuntarily, and from overflowing abundance and power with everything that has hitherto been called holy, good, intangible, or divine, to whom the loftiest conception which the people have reasonably made their measure of value would already practically imply danger, ruin, abasement, or at least relaxation, blindness, or temporary self-forgetfulness. The ideal of a humanly superhuman welfare and benevolence, which will often enough appear inhuman, for example, when put alongside all of past seriousness on earth, and alongside all of past solemnities in bearing, word, tone, look, morality, and pursuit, as their truest involuntary parody, and with which, nevertheless, perhaps the great seriousness only commences. When the proper interrogative mark is set up, the fate of the soul changes, the hour hand moves, and tragedy begins. Although the figure of Zarathustra and a large number of the leading thoughts in this work had appeared much earlier in the dreams and writings of the author, Thus Spoke Zarathustra did not actually come into being until the month of August 1881 in Sils Maria, and it was the idea of the eternal recurrence of all things which finally induced my brother to set forth his new views, in poetic language. in regard to his first conception of this idea, his autobiographical sketch, Ecce Homo, written in the autumn of 1888, contains the following passage. The fundamental ideal of my work, namely, the eternal recurrence of all things, this highest of all possible formula of a yea-saying philosophy, first occurred to me in August of 1881. I made a note of the thought on a sheet of paper with the postscript, 6,000 feet beyond men and time. That day I happened to be wandering through the woods alongside the lake of Silvaplana, and I halted beside a huge, pyramidal and towering rock not far from Surrey. It was then that the thought struck me. Looking back now, I find that exactly 2 months previous to this inspiration, I had had an omen of its coming in the form of a sudden and decisive alteration in my taste, more particularly in music. It would even be possible to consider all Zarathustra as a musical composition. All the events, a very necessary condition in its production was a renaissance in myself of the art of hearing. In a small mountain resort, Recogoro, near Vicenza, where I spent the spring of 1881, I and my friend and maestro, Peter Glass, also one who had been born again, discovered that the phoenix music that hovered over us wore lighter and brighter plumes than it had done theretofore. That is an interesting turn of phrase. I am not familiar with phoenix music. If you know what that means, let me know, because I will probably forget to look it up by the time I get to the end of this. If you want to just remind me to look it up down below, that is perfectly acceptable as well. I don't want to miss that, because phoenix is one of those keywords that we need to pay attention to. During the month of August 1881, my brother resolved to reveal the teachings of the eternal recurrence in dithyrambic and psalmodic form through the mouth of Zarathustra. Among the notes of this period, we found a page on which is written the first definite plan of Thus Spake Zarathstra, midday and eternity, guidepost to a new way of living. Beneath this is written, Zarathustra, born on Lake Ermi, left his home in his 30th year, went into the province of Aria, and during 10 years of solitude in the mountains, composed the Zen Avesta. The sun of knowledge stands once more at midday, and the serpent of eternity lies coiled in its light. It is your time, ye midday brethren. In that summer of 1881, my brother, after many years of steadily declining health, began at last to rally, and it is to this first gush of the recovery of his once splendid body condition that we owe not only the gay science, which in its mood may be regarded as a prelude to Zarathustra, but also the Zarathustra itself. Just as he was beginning to recuperate his health, however, an unkind destiny brought him a number of most painful personal experiences. His friends caused him many disappointments, which were the more bitter to him, inasmuch as he regarded friendship as such a sacred institution. And for the first time in his life he realized the whole horror of that loneliness to which, perhaps, all greatness is condemned. But to be forsaken is something very different from deliberately choosing blessed loneliness. How he longed in those days for the ideal friend who would thoroughly understand him, to whom he would be able to say all, and whom he imagined he had found at various periods in his life, from his earliest youth onward. Now, however, that the way he had chosen grew ever more perilous and steep, he found nobody who could follow him. He therefore created a perfect friend for himself in the ideal form of a majestic philosopher, and made this creation the preacher of his gospel to the world. Whether my brother would ever have written Thus Spake Zarathustra according to the first plan sketched in the summer of 1881, if he had not the disappointments already referred to, is now an idle question. But Perhaps where the Zarathustra is concerned, we may also say with Master Eckhart, the fleetest beast is to bear you to perfection is suffering. My brother writes as follows about the origin of the first part of Zarathustra. In the winter of 1882 to 83, I was living in the charming little Gulf of Rapallo, not far from Genoa and between Chiarvi and Cape Portovino. My health was not very good. The winter was cold and exceptionally rainy, and the small inn in which I lived was so close to the water that at night my sleep would be disturbed if the sea were high. These circumstances were surely the very reverse of favorable. And yet, in spite of it all, and as if in demonstration of my belief that everything decisive comes to life in spite of every obstacle, it was precisely during this winter and in the midst of these unfavorable circumstances that my Zarathustra originated. In the morning I used to start out in a southerly direction up the glorious road to Zoagli, which rises aloft through a forest of pines and gives one a view far out into the sea. In the afternoon, as often as my health permitted, I walked around the whole bay from Santa Margarita to beyond Portofino. This spot was all the more interesting to me, inasmuch as it was so dearly loved by Emperor Friedrich III. In the autumn of 1886, I chanced to be there again when he was revisiting this small, forgotten world of happiness for the last time. It was on these two roads that all Zarathustra came to me. Above all, Zarathustra himself as a type. Ought rather to say that it was on these walks that these ideas waylaid me. The first part of Zarathustra was written in about 10 days, that is to say, from the beginning to about the middle of February 1883. The last lines were written precisely in the hallowed hour when Richard Wagner gave up the ghost in Venice. With the exception of the 10 days occupied in composing the first part of this book, my brother often referred to this winter as the hardest and sickliest he had ever experienced. He did not, however, mean thereby that his former disorders were troubling him, but that he was suffering from a severe attack of influenza, which he had caught in Santa Margherita, and which tormented him for several weeks after his arrival in Genoa. As a matter of fact, however, what he complained of most was his spiritual condition, that indescribable forsakenness, to which he gives such heart-rending expression in Zarathustra. Even the reception which the first part met with at the hands of friends and acquaintances was extremely disheartening, for almost all those to whom he presented copies of the work misunderstood it. I found no one right for many of my thoughts. The case of Zarathustra proves that one can speak with the uttermost clearness and yet not be heard by anyone. My brother was very much discouraged by the feebleness of the response he was given, and as he was striving just then to give up the practice of taking hydrate of chloral, a drug he had begun taking while ill with influenza, the following spring, spent in Rome, was a somewhat gloomy one for him. He writes about it as follows: I spent the melancholy spring in Rome, where I only just managed to live. And this was no easy matter. This city, which is absolutely unsuited to the poet-author of Zarathustra, and for the choice of which I was not responsible, made me inordinately miserable. I tried to leave it. I wanted to go to Aquila, the opposite of Rome in every respect, and actually found it in a spirit of enmity towards that city, just as I also shall found a city some day. As a memento of an atheist and genuine enemy of the Church, a person very closely related to me, the great Hohenstaufen, the Emperor Friedrich II, but fate lay behind it all. I had to return again to Rome. In the end, I was obliged to be satisfied with the Piazza Barberini, after I had exerted myself in vain to find an anti-Christian quarter. I fear that on one occasion, to avoid bad smells as much as possible, I actually inquired at the Palazzo del Quirinale whether they could not provide a quiet room for a philosopher, in a chamber high above the piazza just mentioned, from which one obtained a general view of Rome and could hear the fountains splashing far below. The loneliest of all songs was composed, the night song. About this time I was obsessed by an unspeakably sad melody, the refrain of which I recognized in the words, "Dead through more immortality." We remained somewhat too long in Rome that spring, and what with the effect of the increasing heat and the discouraging circumstances already described, my brother resolved not to write any more, or in any case not to proceed with Zarathustra, although I offered to relieve him of all trouble in connection with the proofs and the publisher. When, however, we returned to Switzerland towards the end of June, and he found himself once more in the familiar and exhilarating air of the mountains, all his joyous, creative powers revived, and in a note to me, announcing the dispatch of some manuscript, he wrote as follows: "I have engaged a place here for 3 months. Forsooth, I am the greatest fool, to allow my courage to be sapped from me by the climate of Italy. Now and again I am troubled by the thought, what next? My future is the darkest thing in the world to me, but as there still remains a great deal for me to do, I suppose I ought rather to think of doing this than of my future, and leave the rest to thee and the gods." The second part of Zarathustra was written between the 26th of June and the 6th of July. This summer, finding myself once more in the sacred place where the first thought of Zarathustra flashed across my mind, I conceived the second part. 10 days sufficed. Neither for the second, the first, nor the third part have I required a day longer. He often used to speak of the ecstatic mood in which he wrote Zarathustra, how in his walks over hill and dale the ideas would crowd into his mind, and how he would note them down hastily in a notebook from which he would transcribe them on his return, sometimes working till midnight. He says in a letter to me, "You can have no idea of the vehemence of such composition," and in Ecce Homo, autumn 1888, he describes as follows, with passionate enthusiasm, the incomparable mood in which he created Zarathustra. Has anyone at the end of the 19th century any distinct notion of what poets of a stronger age understood by the word inspiration? If not, I will describe it. If one had the smallest vestige of superstition in one, it would hardly be possible to set aside completely the idea that one is the mere incarnation, mouthpiece, or medium of an almighty power. The idea of revelation in the sense that something becomes suddenly visible and audible with indescribable certainty and accuracy, which profoundly convulses and upsets one, describes simply the matter of fact. One hears, one does not seek, one takes, one does not ask who gives. A thought suddenly flashes up like lightning. It comes with necessity, unhesitatingly. I have never had any choice in the matter. There is an ecstasy, such as the immense strain of it is sometimes relaxed by a flood of tears, along with which one's steps either rush or involuntarily lag alternately. There is the feeling that one is completely out of hand, with the very distinct consciousness of an endless number of fine thrills and quiverings to the very toes. There is a depth of happiness in which the painfulest and gloomiest do not operate as antithesis, but as conditioned, as demanded, in the sense of necessary shades of color in such an overflow of light. There is an instinct for rhythmic relations which embraces wide areas of forms. Length, the need of a wide embracing rhythm, is almost the measure of the force of an inspiration, a sort of counterpart to its pressure and tension. Everything happens quite involuntarily, as if in a tempestuous outburst of freedom, of absoluteness, of power and divinity. The involuntariness of the figures and similes is the most remarkable thing. One loses all perception of what constitutes the figure and what constitutes the simile. Everything seems to present itself as the readiest, the correctest, and the simplest means of expression. It actually seems, to use one of Zarathustra's own phrases, as if all things came unto one, and would fain be similes. Here do all things come caressingly to thee at thy talk, and flatter thee, for they want to ride upon thy back. On every simile dost thou here ride to every truth. Here fly open unto thee all being's words and word cabinets. Here all being waneth to become words, wanteth to become words. Here all becoming wanteth to learn of thee how to talk. This is my experience of inspiration. I do not doubt but that would have to go back thousands of years in order to find someone who could say it to me. It is mine also. I can say it to you. I have been down that road. I am currently on that road. In the autumn of 1883, my brother left the Engadine for Germany and stayed there a few weeks. In the following winter, after wandering somewhat erratically through Stresa, Genoa, and Spezia, he landed in Nice, where the climate so happily promoted his creative powers that he wrote a third part of Zarathustra. In the winter, beneath the halcyon sky of Nice, which then looked down on me for the first time in my life, I found the third Zarathustra, and come to the end of my task, the whole having occupied me scarcely a year. Many hidden corners and heights in the landscapes round about Nice are hallowed to me by unforgettable moments. That decisive chapter titled Old and New Tables was composed in the very difficult ascent from the station to Eza, that wonderful Moorish village in the rocks. My most creative moments were always accompanied by unusual muscular activity. The body is inspired. Let us waive the questions of the soul. I might often have been seen dancing in those days without a suggestion of fatigue. I could then walk for 7 or 8 hours on end among the hills. I slept well and laughed well. I was perfectly robust and patient. As we have seen, each of the 3 parts of Zarathustra was written after a more or less short period of preparation, in about 10 days. The composition of the 4th part alone was broken by occasional interruptions. The first notes relating to this part were written while he and I were staying together in Zurich in September of 1884. In the following November, while staying at Mentone, he began to elaborate these notes, and after a long pause, finished the manuscript at Nice between the end of January and the middle of February, 1885. My brother then called this part the 4th and last, but even before and shortly after it had been privately printed, he wrote to me saying that he still intended writing a 5th and 6th part, and notes relating to these parts are now in my possession. This 4th part, the original manuscript of which contains this note, only for my friends, not for the public, is written in a particularly personal spirit, and those few to whom he presented a copy of it he pledged to the strictest secrecy concerning its contents. He often thought of making this 4th part public also, but doubted whether he would ever be able to do so without considerably altering portions of it. At all events, he resolved to distribute this manuscript production, of which only 40 copies were printed, only among those who had proved themselves worthy of it, and it speaks eloquently of his utter loneliness and need of sympathy in those days, that he had to occasion to present only 7 copies of his book according to this resolution. Already, at the beginning of this history, I hinted at the reasons which led my brother to select a Persian as the incarnation of his ideal of the majestic philosopher. His reasons, however, for choosing Zarathustra of all the others to be his mouthpiece, he gives us in the following words. People have never asked me, as they should have done, what the name Zarathustra precisely means in my mouth, and the mouth of the first and moralist. For what distinguishes that philosopher from all others in the past is the very fact that he was exactly the reverse of an immoralist. Zarathustra was the first to see in the struggle between good and evil the essential wheel in the working of things. The translation of morality into the metaphysical as force, cause, end in itself was his work. But the very question suggests its own answer. Zarathustra created the most portentous error, morality. Consequently, he should also be the first to perceive that error, not only because he has had longer and greater experience of the subject than any other thinker. All history is the experimental refutation of the theory of the so-called moral order of things. The more important point is that Zarathustra was more truthful than any other thinker. In his teachings alone do we meet with truthfulness upheld as the highest virtue. An example, the reverse of the cowardice of the idealist who flees from reality. Zarathustra had more courage in his body than any other thinker before or after him, to tell the truth and to aim straight. That is the first Persian virtue. Am I understood? The overcoming of morality through itself, through truthfulness, the overcoming of the moralist through his opposite, through me. That is what the name Zarathustra means in my mouth. Elizabeth Forrester Nietzsche, Nietzsche Archives, Weimar, December of 1905. That was an unfortunate place to be shortly thereafter. And so we end the introduction to Thus Spake Zarathustra. And I did not interrupt this nearly as much as I probably will going forward into other parts. This introduction was important mostly to read as it was, right? I felt like it was not the place to interject myself too much. I do have similars, right? I feel like maybe I am on the opposite end of a spectrum from Nietzsche on this. And by that, it's hard to say because we both seem to be seeking to be the best man, right? That is literally my goal. I am trying to be the best man that God has created me to be. I'm trying to be the best husband. I'm trying to be the best father. I'm trying to be the best steward of the resources. I fail, but I am genuinely striving for that. That is my ideal. That appears to be his ideal as well. But he is pursuing this ideal without a key that I have. He doesn't have enlightenment. It is obvious by the afflictions through which he suffered. Now, that is not the loneliness. That is definitely one of the things that comes along with even a little bit of enlightenment, which I do claim. I don't claim to be some prophet or metaphysical genius or anything, but I have done a small measure of significant things within my own life that are definitely metaphysically related. And so I am on a different tip than what he is. We seem to be pursuing the same goals from opposite places because he seems to be very much in the mortality side of the pursuit, whereas I am more on the divinity side of the pursuit. I could be mistaken. I have never read through Nietzsche before. I've only heard other people talk about it, and that's why we're doing this. From what I gather from this, he suffered with depression. He suffered with addiction. He suffered with anxiety. That seems to be three of the major problems that he has. We know that later in his life he suffered a severe break. It is supposed that it is vascular dementia, which is where your body starts forgetting things. Sometimes it's memory, sometimes it's how to breathe, sometimes it's how to walk. My father-in-law just recently passed. He had vascular dementia. That's why I know what I'm talking about on this one. He was fully functioning in his mind, but his body forgot how to do things. Vascular dementia is a severe problem, right? And so, but that was later in life, and that didn't seem to affect him prior to. It seems to be that he was depressive, that he had not reached the enlightenment stage, or else that depression really kind of goes away. It really does. And it sounds trite to say that, but once you have at least had the amount of enlightenment that I have, it really does chase a lot of those problems away. It is perfectly fine to be alone for me. Like, I do crave people, but there is nobody on my, not level, but on my desire level, right? I am desiring to be the best me. I don't have time for people who don't want to be the best them. Now, that does not mean that you are the best you. That means that you want to. And to be honest, most people do not. They say they do. They say that they want to be the best version of themselves, but they do not, in any shape, take action upon that desire. I am taking action upon that desire. I am literally physically doing things. I am improving my physical health every single day, and that is so vitally important because the inspiration, I have that. I have written a book. It is not great, but I have been inspired doing that. I'm writing songs currently, and this is the exact process. What he talks about, the physical exertion, that's me on my walks every morning, right? We talk all the time about the walks. I do a prayer walk every morning if you don't know. There's a whole playlist of shorts where after I do my prayers for you, which I do every single day, I try to do a positive message. I don't hit every single day with that, but I do try. And it's on here on YouTube, and it's also on TikTok, and I put it over there just so it's positive, right? I'm trying to be the example. And the inspiration for those things comes during my walk. Well, I'm up 2-3 miles these days, and if you don't know my story, you don't know that's significant. But when I started, it took me 45 minutes to walk 1 mile. It was hard. I have a lot of problems. I'm up to 3 miles now, and I'm doing it fairly quickly, so I am not mad at all. I am not fully able in my body yet, but it is getting much better in my life. While I am doing this, I have a lot of time on my hands. So I am writing the songs through this inspiration process that he describes here in a very good way as I'm walking, right? As I'm physically exerting myself. Most of the time, if I get stuck on an idea or if I need to contemplate something, I will walk. If I am talking on the phone and I am trying to think about the things I am talking about, I will walk. It is the physical exertion that allows the becoming. We talk about the Trinity all the time, and this is where we're going to start to wrap this one up. I hold a slightly different viewpoint on a lot of things, and one of those is the Trinity. And some people hold the same view, but a lot of people hold a different one. My version of the Trinity is this: the body, the meat suit, the part that you are riding around in, the soul, which resides in the third eye, which is locatable and activatable, and you can do all of those things through one of these playlists over here, and the becoming, which is the motion of time, right? It is the Holy Spirit, the fire of life, but it is nothing without motion. The body does not move through you. You make the decision, I'm going to move my fingers, but you don't do it. You make the decision to hold your breath, but when you're sleeping, you don't make the decision to breathe. That's the spirit. It's the part that transitions the now into the next. It's the part that takes what is and turns it into the desire of, or the action that you're taking. It is the actual becoming is the third part of the Trinity. It's the body, the mind, and the spirit. All. Those things act together to create, right? Part of the creation is all. I really lost my train of thought out of where I was going with the Trinity. And anyway, that's my definition of the Trinity, if you weren't aware. I was already starting to wrap this up, but he seems to have suffered from sadness. That means that he was not on the enlightenment part. He seems to suffer from depression and anxiety, and so he didn't pull into consideration these things. He labels himself as an atheist, and that's a step, right? It takes a lot of faith to believe in nothing. But mostly, he labels himself as an anti-Christian. Now, I have a whole playlist where I did an unconventional Bible study where I discovered that I was not a Christian. I do believe in God, though, 100%. I serve God 10 toes down. I am fully invested in it, and it is part of what I am doing here. We are dispensing knowledge. We are being the example of learning and growing and doing responsible emotional things. I got a whole playlist of reactions where I only react to things where we can talk about serious issues. I am trying to be the positive example that he is talking about here. I am trying to do the things that he describes here, and it is a lonely road. I want more people along. That's why we're doing this. I am dispensing wisdom, hopefully, along the way. We're going to go ahead and wrap this one up because I am rambling at this point. But if you like this type of content, we will be doing more. We have already done a good bit, and there is plenty to dig around in. Hopefully, I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat complicated topic. I am sure there will be more discussion as we go forward. This is merely the introduction. If you like what I'm doing here, let me know down below. Hit me with a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. Whether you agree or disagree, if it stays respectful, it gets to stay up. And if you really like what I'm doing here, hit me with that super thanks. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Fit State. Peace.